Sometimes, a single glance between two people can light up the screen brighter than 1,000 spotlights. In 1990, the world witnessed a love story so magical that it never faded, not even after decades. Julia Roberts and Richard Gere didn't just play lovers in Pretty Woman. They created a spark that refuses to die. The early 1990s were a golden era for romantic films. Hollywood was buzzing with love stories, comedies, and dreamy scripts that promised audiences a mix of laughter, tears, and hope. Why people wanted to believe in love, and theaters became temples where romance played out on the big screen. This was the time when Julia Roberts and Richard Gere would cross paths in a way that would change cinema forever. Julia Roberts was not yet the superstar we know today. She was young, fresh-faced, and filled with an energy that made her stand out from the crowd. She had already shown sparks of her talent in films like Steel Magnolias, where critics praised her emotional depth and charm. But Julia was still searching for that one role that would make the world fall in love with her. She needed a story that would turn her from an actress into a legend. On the other hand, Richard Gere was already an established name. He's known for his roles in American Gigolo and An Officer and a Gentleman. He was the image of a suave and confident leading man. Women adored him, men respected him, and Hollywood trusted him to bring sophistication and strength to the screen. But despite his popularity, Gere was also searching for a role that would show his softer, more romantic side. He was waiting for the perfect story and the perfect partner to reveal it. And then came Pretty Woman. The film wasn't originally meant to be the fairy tale romance we know today. In fact, the first script was darker, focusing more on the struggles of life rather than the beauty of love. But as production went on, the filmmakers realized something powerful. Julia Roberts and Richard Gere had a connection that was too special to ignore. Their chemistry was so natural, so effortless, that the movie began to transform into something brighter and more magical. What could have been a gritty story turned into one of the most beloved romantic comedies of all time. Hollywood in the 1990s was competitive, but it also thrived on stories that gave audiences hope. People came to theaters to escape their everyday lives, and they wanted characters who could make them believe in love again. When Julia Roberts appeared on screen with her wide smile, and Richard Gere followed with his quiet, graceful charm, audiences didn't just watch them, they felt them. Something about the way their eyes met, the way they spoke to each other, carried an electricity that no script could fully write. It was real, raw, and unforgettable. By the time Pretty Woman was released in March 1990, the film was more than just another romantic comedy. It was a cultural event. Julia Roberts, with her radiant laugh and free spirit, became America's sweetheart almost overnight. Richard Gere, with his calm presence and striking looks, became the dream man every romantic story needed. And together, they became the perfect on-screen couple, one that would be remembered not just for a season, but for a lifetime. This was the beginning of something eternal. The spark had been lit, and the world would never look at Julia Roberts and Richard Gere the same way again. Their journey was only starting, but already Hollywood had found its ultimate love story. It's easy to talk about chemistry in movies. Critics often say those actors had great chemistry, as if it's something that can be taught or rehearsed. But true chemistry, the kind that makes audiences lean forward in their seats, the kind that makes people believe in love even after the credits roll, cannot be manufactured. It either exists or it doesn't. And in the case of Julia Roberts and Richard Gere, it existed in every glance, every smile, every pause between their lines. From the very first table read, the filmmakers knew something unusual was happening. Julia, with her playful energy, brought a youthful unpredictability to the room. Richard, older and more grounded, carried a calm, steady presence. When their eyes met, there was a contrast, but instead of clashing, they blended. She was fire. He was water. She was laughter. He was silence. Together, they created balance. That balance became the heartbeat of Pretty Woman. One moment captured this better than any other. It wasn't planned. It wasn't in the script. Julia opened a jewelry box and Richard snapped it shut, almost teasing her. Julia burst into an unrestrained laugh, wide, free, and unforgettable. The crew laughed with her, the director smiled, and the cameras kept rolling. That laugh, that sparkle in her eyes, became one of the most iconic moments in film history. And it was born not from direction, but from genuine connection. This was the secret. Julia and Richard weren't just acting. They were reacting to each other in real time. He admired her spontaneity. She leaned into his stability. Their conversations flowed naturally, as if they weren't following lines, but living them. When Richard looked at Julia, the softness in his eyes told a story of a man surprised by love. When Julia smiled back, her joy wasn't forced, it was real. Audiences could feel that, and it drew them closer into the story. Off camera, too, the bond continued. Richard was protective, often checking in on Julia, who was still new to the overwhelming spotlight of Hollywood stardom. Julia, in return, brought lightness to Richard, making him laugh between takes, easing the weight of his more serious personality. They balanced each other like two halves of a whole. That balance spilled onto the screen. The result was a romance that didn't just entertain, it enchanted. Fans didn't see Julia Roberts and Richard Gere acting as Vivian Ward and Edward Lewis. They saw two souls colliding, creating sparks that made love look alive and possible. That's why decades later, audiences still rewatch Pretty Woman. Not for the fashion, not for the soundtrack, but for the magic that happened when Julia Roberts and Richard Gere shared a scene. It wasn't scripted. It wasn't rehearsed. It was simply destiny caught on camera, asterisk, when Pretty Woman hit theaters in 1990. No one expected what was about to happen. It wasn't just another romantic comedy. It wasn't just another movie release in a crowded Hollywood schedule. It was a phenomenon, a wave of charm and wonder that swept across the world. Audiences didn't just watch Pretty Woman, they experienced it. Couples walked out of theaters holding hands tighter than before. Teenagers pinned Julia Roberts' radiant smile on their walls. Men in suits suddenly looked at their briefcases and wondered if they too could be swept away by love. For 2 hours, the film gave people permission to dream. The box office numbers told one story, hundreds of millions earned worldwide, making it one of the most successful romantic comedies ever. But the real story was written in the hearts of the people who watched it. Moviegoers returned again and again, not because the plot was complicated, but because the feelings were real. Julia Roberts became a household name overnight. She wasn't just a star, she was the star. The woman who could light up a room with a laugh and break your heart with a single tear. Richard Gere, already admired, was reborn as the ultimate romantic hero, a man whose quiet strength hid a tenderness audiences longed to see in their own lives. The film's influence didn't stop at the theater doors. Fashion shifted. Julia's red gown and Richard's black tuxedo set a new standard for elegance. The soundtrack became legendary, with songs like Roy Orbison's "Oh, Pretty Woman" playing on radios everywhere. People didn't just quote the movie. They lived it. Phrases like "big mistake," "huge," became part of everyday conversation. Suddenly everyone wanted to believe in second chances, fairy tale endings, and the magic of love found in the unlikeliest of places. But perhaps the greatest impact of Pretty Woman was invisible, the way it shaped the way people looked at love itself. This wasn't a typical Hollywood romance where perfection met perfection. It was a story of transformation. A businessman who had everything but happiness, and a woman who had nothing but hope, meeting in the middle. It told audiences that love wasn't about status or wealth, but about two hearts recognizing each other. Decades later, the ripple effect still continues. Every romantic comedy that followed, from Notting Hill to The Proposal, carries a trace of Pretty Woman's DNA. Directors studied it, writers tried to replicate it, and actors dreamed of finding that same on-screen magic. But the truth is it can't be duplicated. What Julia Roberts and Richard Gere created wasn't a formula. It was lightning in a bottle. The impact of Pretty Woman lives on because it wasn't just a movie. It was a mirror, reflecting the dream we all secretly hold, that love can find us when we least expect it and change our lives forever. 9 years after Pretty Woman first cast its spell, Hollywood tried to bottle that magic again. And in 1999, it happened. Julia Roberts and Richard Gere were reunited on the big screen in Runaway Bride. For fans, it felt less like a casting choice and more like destiny coming full circle. The spark hadn't died. It'd only been waiting quietly until the right story called them back together. The anticipation was electric. Audiences didn't walk into theaters wondering about the plot, they came to see them. Julia and Richard. Vivian and Edward, reborn in new names, new lives, but carrying the same invisible thread of chemistry. Posters of the film showed Julia in a wedding dress and sneakers, Richard by her side, calm as ever. It was playful, romantic, and familiar. It whispered one simple promise: the magic is still alive. Behind the scenes, the reunion was just as warm as fans hoped it would be. Richard admitted that working with Julia again felt natural, almost effortless. Like slipping into a conversation you thought had ended years ago, but had never truly stopped. Julia glowed with comfort, saying Richard's presence brought her a sense of calm, the same calming anchor that balanced her lively spirit a decade earlier. Their director, Gary Marshall, who had guided them through Pretty Woman, returned to, as if the universe was setting the stage for another fairy tale. The story of Runaway Bride, about a woman who kept fleeing weddings and the journalist who tried to understand her, gave Julia and Richard a chance to explore love from a different angle. This time, their characters weren't strangers from different worlds, but two people learning to face their fears and meet love halfway. The film wasn't trying to replace Pretty Woman. It didn't need to. Instead, it celebrated the rare connection between two actors whose bond simply couldn't be confined to one story, and audiences felt it again. Laughter, the tenderness, the unspoken warmth between them. It was all still there, watching. Julia Run and Richard Chase wasn't just about the characters. It was about the audience chasing a memory and finding it alive once more. Critics may have debated the film's originality, but fans knew the truth. They weren't watching a movie. They were witnessing a reunion of hearts. By the time the credits rolled, Runaway Bride had proven something powerful: that Julia Roberts and Richard Gere weren't just a one-time miracle. They were a partnership written in cinematic history, capable of reigniting their spark even after nearly a decade apart. Their reunion reminded the world of an undeniable truth: some connections don't fade. They wait, they linger, and when the right moment comes, they return brighter than ever.